The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Amalia Shatella. My name is Akile Anai, Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is highly important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to it. This week, Chairman Amalia Shatella reads from his latest work, Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, dealing with African internationalist dual power versus new African opportunism, starting on page 145. For the first hour, Chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we'll open it up for you, our online viewers, to ask your questions. It is my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leadership of the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Amalia Shatella. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Director Akile. I'd like to really express my appreciation to all the comrades who've come on to the study on today. And what I would like for all of us to understand when we entering into this discussion is that this study that we're involved in comes from a political report to the African People's Socialist Party. It's not simply a piece that was written for as an intellectual exercise or just for our own entertainment or information consumption. This political report responds to the need of the African People's Socialist Party to continuously sum up our reality and helps to unite our party in the struggle for the liberation of our people and for the emancipation of the working peoples of the world. It informs our practice. It helps us to understand exactly where we are at the moment and where it is that we have to be going. It is a political report that contributes to the ongoing efforts being made by our party to make sure that we are not simply being pulled one way or the other by events, but that everything that we do is something that is informed by strategy, informed by our revolutionary theory, and that it happens under the leadership of a revolutionary party, the Advanced Detachment. So I think it's important to make that statement. And also it is important to say just how important these studies are right now. This study, the political report to members of our party, to the Uhuru movement, to masses of people who trying to interpret what's going on in the world and how to intervene and whether to intervene in what's going on in the world. And by that, I mean that we recognize that right now there is an extraordinary turbulence that is occurring in society, and that's globally, not just limited to the United States. The United States has an added significance because it is the existing reigning hegemon whose crown is growing increasingly heavy and who is staggering throughout the world, trying to maintain that hegemony and trying to maintain the world domination with this great struggle that's happening within the ruling circles themselves over how this might be best carried out strategically, with one arm clearly recognizing that the masses have been unleashed in a way that's upset the existing world order. And the assumption is that by this sector that if they can cleverly seduce the people to participating in our own oppression, coming up with concepts of multi-ethnic unity, or the US being some kind of multicultural entity, and bringing more and more masses of the oppressed, the African working people, the people who they refer to as Latino, people who have been mostly oppressed and enslaved by Spain and then the United States in this territory, and who are mostly Spanish-speaking, the other indigenous people in the territorial United States. If the objective here is to win as much of them and to open up a door to what appears to be their freedom and liberation by having them seduced by the possibility of one day being a part of the oppressor nation or being embraced by the oppressor nation. On the other hand, there are sectors of the bourgeoisie that recognizes this crisis as well and assumes that the way that this crisis is to be contained or eliminated is by crushing the masses of the people, by crushing any potential, by not even pretending that the Africans and other people have any rights, that by demonizing and bestializing in the consciousness of the colonizer nation, who the Africans are, and sometimes convincing those among the colonized that that oppression is the best way to maintain the status quo. So this contest is happening, and it's been driven by desperation. It's been driven and has been for a while now by the growing resistance necessarily of the people to take back our freedom and our resources. That the fact is that the system that we live under is a capitalist system that was brought into existence by colonial slavery, that has been developed over a period of time through growing this colonial slavery exploitation of Africans and other peoples around the world. And by virtue of a system being based on the ongoing expropriation of value, human and material value of the peoples, then the people's fight for freedom, the people trying to take back our resources, the people trying to live, saying that that paved street shouldn't go to New York, but it should be right here in Ghana, or it should be here in some other sector of the world where the resources are coming from to pave that street in New York. These efforts of people who want to be able to say that my child will have a chance to live, and it shouldn't be determined on whether a good white woman is in the Supreme Court of the United States or not, or whether a good white guy or a good Negro lackey is being embraced by white power or not. The people should have our own ability to live, and that's what's happening, and it's disrupting the entire system. So a state of crisis has been going on for a while as people have been moving toward their freedom, and other peoples, the great countries themselves, have been trying to break out of and successfully breaking out of the quarantine that the US in particular, but what is called Western imperialism and Western capitalism has imposed on them, so that they cannot compete for resources with the dominant capitalist system. So this has led to a tremendous tumultuous kind of situation in the world, and that's been exacerbated by the colonial virus that's killing people around the world, more than 2 million, more than 200,000 in the United States, which is one of the leading places where, in terms of the effectiveness of the virus, where 6 million people at least have been infected with the virus, and this great superpower, this great rich democratic bastion of the rights and health and well-being of the people, it's created a really serious situation, not only for the bourgeoisie or the ruling class inside this country, but it is destabilizing the whole world order, as much of the world order has revolved around the power of the United States, as it is expressed in 1,000 different ways through 1,000 different institutions, many of which are familiar to you, like the United Nations, like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, like the World Trade Organization, various other entities like that. So there's a great instability that exists today. And thousands of people have been drawn to the streets in this country, that is to say, in the United States, demonstrating, protesting, And these protests and demonstrations and actual uprisings that have occurred, clearly showing again the centrality of the struggle of the colonized African people in this country. They have been sparked, these mobilizations, uprising, etc., by the recent colonial murders of African people by the domestic military arm of the colonial state that's called the police department. And so this has thrown all kinds of forces in motion. Nothing is today as it was just a few weeks ago. Just everything is in a state of flux, and people are in motion. And these studies that we're doing are so important because the consequences of this motion must be revolutionary transformation. That is the overturning of a particular colonial capitalist system and its replacement by another world order where the peoples, the toiling masses of the world will have command of our own resources, the value of our own labor, and we can be rid forever of this, this white nationalist hegemonic force that has driven history for the last 500 years or more. So that's why it's so important that we do these studies, because we have to be engaged in the struggles. And in many ways, of course, we are engaged. We are already engaged in several different ways, but we need to continue to remember the significance of our engagement, because sometimes what appears to be a task, a strategic effort we're involved in, sometimes this task, this effort is all consuming. And as well as we do it, we lose sight of the fact that why we are doing it, what it means in terms of overturning a social system and replacing it, and our responsibility as the advanced detachment, as the revolutionary working class, to lead this motion everywhere it's happening, to provide leadership for it, to make sure that we're not dragged back to that last period of the, especially from the 50s and early 60s, where the African petty bourgeoisie middle class provided the leadership of the struggle for democracy, even for the struggle for democracy, so that there was a petty bourgeois struggle for democracy, a petty bourgeois democracy. Now, the African working class has at its disposal, finally, its own revolutionary working class organization. So we have to be involved in this struggle for democracy. And what we have to fight for is a revolutionary proletariat led struggle for democracy that might involve and will involve the African petty bourgeoisie, and other forces who are not Africans will be involved in this struggle too, but it has to be under the leadership of the advanced detachment. Otherwise, what we end up doing is refighting, going back to an era of where our struggle was led by the petty bourgeoisie. And that's even relates to the question of how white people are involved in this effort, whether we have masses of white people who have been in motion. That's been one of the outstanding optics of what we've been seeing, and given the bourgeoisie and other forces an opportunity to say, well, this is different from the 60s because there's so many white people who are involved, et cetera. Yes, there are. And the fact of the matter is that the motion of African people who function at the base of the society, the fundamental economic and political force that gave rise to the system, the motion of Black people, the motion of the other oppressed people destabilizes the entire system and opens up doors for white people, for white women, for white homosexuals, for white workers, or anybody else. I say white workers, I say that loosely, but any other sector of the white population. We see anarchists and a whole host of forces now at work. They've had an opportunity now as a consequence of the motion initiated by African people and the African working class. Essentially, we see them being thrust in the motion and having opportunities to express their hatred of this social system. But the thing that will make the difference in whether or not we're talking about proletarian democracy, a working class democracy, a struggle for democracy, a democratic struggle led by the African working class or led by the petty bourgeoisie or by the bourgeoisie itself, is recognition of the fundamental critical role that is played by Africa and the colonization of African peoples of the world and leading this struggle. The ability of white people, no matter how radical they may appear to be, no matter what they call themselves, this kind of communist, that kind of communist, the anarchist or what have you, the value of their participation, the significance of their participation is when it's done, it occurs under the leadership of the independent advanced detachment of the oppressed, of the colonized, of the African working class. That means they're under the leadership of the Uhuru movement of the African People's Socialist Party. And in other instances, of course, I mean, there are other sectors, colonized sectors inside the United States and around the world that have to be setting the terms for what this revolution is going to look like. So we're going to talk now, and I've used up a considerable amount of time overviewing this. And because I'm going to leave enough time, I'd like to try and leave enough time so that we can have at least an hour for discussion. But we're going to talk now, as it's been stated. This is chapter 5 of the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And the title of this chapter is African Socialist Internationalist, Dual Power versus New African Opportunism. And first of all, I just want to say again that the critical question of philosophy, of theory, is something that cannot be overstated right now. Who we are, what the struggle is about. I mean, this is not a matter of name calling and anything like that. It's talking about political lines. Which political line would take us to freedom? Which political line will overturn a social system that not only oppresses African people, but oppresses and exploits the toiling masses of people around the world? What political line does that? That's the thing that we're looking at. What political line exposes to the marrow the nature of the social system so that we can get a good grip on this threat? What political line informs us in a way that we contribute to, we deepen the crisis of the social system, as opposed to, in the name of trying to solve our own problems, we uniting with imperialism and solving the problems of the social system, solving the problems, the crisis that the US and the whole imperialist system is confronting. So I'm starting now on page 145, and I'm going to be as expeditious as possible because I do want to leave enough time for us to talk. Excuse me. Throughout our entire history, the African People's Socialist Party has always believed that the strategy of building dual and contending power is key to achieving our overall aim of liberating Africa and African people everywhere. The strategy of dual power is tied to the consolidation of the African nation and the struggle against colonialism. Hear me, dual and contending power. When we say dual power, it has to be contending power. It is not the same as saying that we have some independent school, or we have some independent project that we have over here. These projects must function as negation of the power of the colonizer capitalist that dominates the lives of our people. When we say dual and contending power, that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about they got a school, we got a school. They got a bank, we got a bank. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about anti-colonial school. We're talking about a power that contends with the power of the colonizer. 41 years ago, last April, that would be, I think, something like 43 years now, we introduced the concept of dual power into the African liberation movement with a paper titled, The Political Aspects of Building a Mass Movement, the Tactical and Strategic Objectives for Black Liberation. The paper became influential within our movement and throughout the African liberation struggle in the US. It was printed in installments in the Burning Spear and also published as a regular pamphlet, as a popular pamphlet. The paper was written for the 1977 Black Organizers Conference at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which was attended by many notable figures of our independence movement at the time. And I should tell you that I had already been tasked by the party and was working on a paper dealing with the question of dual power, raising this issue of dual power. when I was asked by the organizer of this Amherst conference that we would speak more of moving forward to appear at that conference to speak to the question of tactics and strategies for national liberation. The people who were there, they included Robert Williams, the first president of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, Reverend Charles Coyne from Cairo, Illinois, Ella Baker, creative genius of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as well as representatives from the Institute of the Black World and others. Also in attendance were representatives of the African People's Party and its founding member, Akbar Mohammed Ahmed, organizer of the conference. And the heroic figure of our liberation movement in his own right. Akbar Mohammed has also been known as Max Stanford, and he was a founding member of the Revolutionary Action Movement, really important expression of revolutionary struggle for self-determination and in the 1960s, late 1960s. Known in the party as Tactics and Strategy for Black Liberation, the document has since guided the party's work. The strategic objectives spelled out in the document have also influenced other organizations within the liberation movement. Increasingly, we are hearing various groups and personalities beginning to espouse the strategic concept of dual power today. In the Tactics and Strategy paper, we laid out these strategic objectives. Quote, one of these objectives must be the creation of dual or competing or contending governmental powers. That is to say, to the degree possible, our movement must assume the real and actual responsibility of government for our people. If we can do this in practice, we will have plunged a wooden stake into the heart of the imperialist blood-sucking vampire of the world. For it is not only true that US bourgeois democracy, which is capable of being so defined because of its ability to obscure its class dictatorship, cannot exist in the face of such mass rejection. But to the degree we can effectively build competing state power, we actually negate the power of the US North American state, unquote. The Tactics and Strategy paper was one of the many efforts made by our party to introduce a scientific approach to the entire African liberation movement in that period, when the US government defeat of our movement left it generally bogged down in cultural nationalism and superstition. Over the years, this paper has continued to guide our party's work. 5 years after its conception, we elaborated on the principles of Tactics and Strategy paper in the political report to the First Party Congress in Oakland in 1981, published as the Struggle for Bread, Peace, and Black Power. Quote, the real question is the demand for political independence, for self-determination, moving off the premise that Africa is the national homeland. As to how this self-determination will be realized, this will depend on several factors: the aspirations of the masses here in Africa and elsewhere during the critical development of our revolution, the actual unfolding of the revolutionary process within the US, and the ability of the party, our party that is, to contribute to the construction of the African Socialist International. The African People's Socialist Party has called for the creation of dual power within the US as a strategic objective for winning liberation. This call presupposes the transformation of every oppressed community within the domestic African colony into revolutionary Soviets for political independence, African liberation, and socialism. Moreover, since the land question in this instance has been demoted from the height of theory and properly raised as a political and strategic objective, a strategic question, it allows us to develop political alliances and relationships with the native people, the North American working class, and others during the unfolding of the revolutionary process in developing a strategy regarding the struggle for land distribution and socialism. This line of the party represents the proper approach to the question of land and nationality. It is a line born out of a dialectical approach to our history and present conditions in the real world. It is a line which targets imperialism thoroughly, as opposed to some neo-Zionist assumptions, which often presupposes an answer which does not destroy imperialism. It is a line which, if adhered to, will surely lead to victory, the defeat of US imperialism, and the socialist revolution. Comrades, this is African internationalism, the theory of the international African working class. And you will see, if you should read this, you should take this, this text directly from the political report, the 7th Congress, the Vanguard, it's printed in the book Vanguard, and you must read it. And there are footnotes and things like this that helps to define some of what we're talking about. It would be good, though, for everyone to read and study this. We are African internationalists. In all our work, we realize that our struggle locally, wherever we are, is a component, a front of the struggle to liberate all 12 million square miles of our conquered and oppressed, resource-rich African homeland. Every African living in colonial captivity must be able to recognize the significance of the struggle within each community as one of the many strategically located launching pads contributing to the victory that will enable Africa to feed, clothe, house, and protect Africa and African people worldwide for all eternity. Land of US stolen from the indigenous people. Critical to the genuine understanding of dual power is the fact that we have always recognized that the land occupied by what is now known as the United States of America was stolen from the indigenous people in a brutal and genocidal war that has not ended. We have always maintained that Africa is the national homeland of African people who have been divided and forcibly dispersed throughout the world. We have never accepted any opportunistic theory that presupposes that our forced colonial enslavement on the land of the indigenous people has somehow transformed us into some kind of hybrid nation with a claim to it. However, neither are we Pan-Africanists who simply claim Africa as our homeland without having any responsibility to fight US imperialism where we are, in the US and elsewhere. The struggle for dual and contending power by Africans within current US borders, under the leadership of our party, is a revolutionary demand, is a revolutionary method, rather, of fracturing the territorial integrity of the US white settler state. We say again, the struggle for dual and contending power by Africans within current US borders under the leadership of our party is a revolutionary method of fracturing the territorial integrity of the US white settler state. It is also a means of seizing the political, ideological, organizational, and economic platform necessary for the practical exercise of incipient Black state power. This understanding enhances the party's presence throughout the African colony. Our local offices, as discussed in chapter 6, become the instruments for exercising power and influence within the colonized nation from bases among the African working class, the real source of revolutionary power when organized in its own independent revolutionary party. We contribute to the defeat of imperialism, the liberation of Africa, and the toiling masses of the world by fighting where we are for genuine dual power as part of the strategy for total African liberation. We must make every colonized African community ungovernable by the colonial state. This is what dual power means. It can also be described as DUEL power, a struggle for actual Black state power at the expense of the white nationalist US state. We are materialists. We understand that power occupies space, territorial, ideological, political, and organizational. It has been this recognition of the practical requirements for territory that has befuddled and compromised some of the honest opportunists, so-called, whose worldviews are limited by imagination and influenced by petty bourgeois class interests. Our position stands in opposition to those who adhere to what is known as the Black Belt South line. which purports that several US southern states with a high concentration of Africans constitute the land base of a, excuse me, of a Negro nation. This is sometimes characterized even today as a new African nation, when its borders are defined as 5 contiguous states in the US South. Those who adhere to the 5-state position are opportunists because they liquidate the struggle for Africa in favor of a presumed short-term victory of a limited land conquest. Often, it is these opportunists who are most eager to characterize our party struggle for dual power to transform every African community into fighting Soviets for the liberation of Africa and Africans worldwide as hypocritical. Indeed, misery does love company. Our point is that the struggle for dual power and the 5-state position are diametrically opposed. We begin with the recognition that this land mass, under the illegitimate authority of the US colonial settler state, is the land of the indigenous people, period. For us, the question of dual power is the means by which we, Africans on this stolen land, are able to establish actual political basis from which to more effectively make the struggle to win our liberation as a step toward the total liberation and unification of Africa and African people. In the struggle for bread, peace, and Black power, we dedicated 2 chapters to this question, and here's a short quote. The theoretical question concerning land is significant as it identifies the land base which must be liberated in order to achieve our historical mission of national liberation and national consolidation. That land base is obviously Africa. It is within Africa that the question of nationality is to be resolved. The Black Belt South position and all of its variations attempt to graft a bourgeois inclination onto our movement through the use of the national question as a manner, which can only mean that our struggle is purely one to achieve land ownership. A genuine revolutionary nationalist struggle for land is a struggle which is designed to remove the blocks which prevent the historical process of liberation and national consolidation from occurring. These blocks are various forms of colonialism, which prevent Africa from being liberated and united under socialism. These forms of colonialism utilize the various Western and US economies to suck Africa dry and to extract super profits, that's what they were calling it then. There's from African workers through employment of the Western and US state apparatuses in destructive opposition to the weakly formed or non-existing African state apparatuses. The colonial conditions of African people in the US are an extension of the colonialism in Africa, which began with the European scramble for Africa immediately following the cessation of the slave trade. There's no way that you can separate the presence of Africans in the United States, in Europe, in the Caribbean, in South America from the attack on Africa by Europe that began the process of creating capitalism and that has been consolidated over these last 500 or 600 years. It is important to note that the discussion of what has been called the national question by Marxism and other militants was mostly used to limit the struggle of Africans and other colonial subjects. Our entry into this discussion was another case of responding to the material conditions we suffer in the real world and how these conditions are affected by the crisis of imperialism as it represents itself today. The ridiculous assertion that some portion of the land within current US borders is the national homeland of African people has serious implications for our struggle. It is a position that unites with the US government attack on the indigenous people who continue to struggle based on the theft of their land and relegation to concentration camps known as so-called Indian reservations. It also deflects the struggle of African people from our mission to liberate and unite Africa and Africans the world over. This assertion makes ours a struggle for land possession as opposed to the revolutionary overthrow of world capitalism that stems from the enslavement of Africans and the theft of the land of the indigenous people. Again, we make an uncompromising statement that the land of the Americas is the land of the indigenous people. We also recognize that struggle within current US borders and other places within the Americas is an obligation of the African Revolution. Again, we must fight for revolution wherever we are located. Specifically, our forced location in the Americas means that the African Revolution itself has a front in the Americas, not only in the US, but in the Caribbean, Brazil, and throughout Central and South America. In other words, Africa is our national homeland, but we are also part of the revolution of the Americas. The struggle of the indigenous people is our struggle also. This relationship sets a principled basis for the combined strategic relationship between African and indigenous peoples against white settler colonialism. African people are one nation forcibly dispersed around the world. Our party, using the historical materialist method of investigation and analysis, and concluded that Black people within current US borders are Africans, an integral part of a forcibly dispersed nation. National oppression and subjugation is not something that is resolved through integration into the system of the colonizing nation. It is resolved through emancipation from the grasp of our predatory, parasitic colonizers. The recognition of Africans globally and within the US being one nation is longstanding. 100 years ago, African nationality was summed up in the declaration by Marcus Garvey, quote, "Africa for Africans at home and abroad," unquote. Garvey's movement was embodied in the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, the UNIA-ACL, with its millions of members stretching across the globe. It was the largest material manifestation of the recognition by Black people worldwide that indeed we are one nation of people dispersed around the world through violence and coercion. In a report to the New York chapter of the UNIA-ACL at the first International Convention of the Negro peoples of the world in 1920, New York delegate Mrs. Sarah Branch stated, quote, "We are tired of being called Negroes. We are not Negroes, we are Africans." And those clause came to that statement. We want to be called Africans. God gave us the name Ethiopians, and we want to be called Ethiopians or Africans. Negro is simply a pet name that the white man, when he went to Africa and stole our foreparents, gave us. Let us all in this convention with one voice cry out, "We will not be called Negroes any longer, but Africans," unquote. However, we cannot overlook the fact that there is a large sector of African people around the world that finds itself endowed with false national consciousness imposed by our colonial oppressors. We exist as hyphenated people everywhere. We are Afro-Germans, Black Brits, and Afro-Americans, Afro-Colombians, etc. On the continent of Africa, we have assumed the identity associated with the European controlled and named territories created for exploitation of our people and resources. We are one Africa and one nation. The party's analysis of our unified African national identity is one of the most significant contributions we have made to the African Revolution. This is why the entire chapter on the African nation from an uneasy equilibrium is definitive and is included in this political report. It is the responsibility of every cadre to fully understand and be fluent in our position on the African nation. Our salvation depends on our rejection of the false national consciousness imposed on Africans by colonial capitalism. Our struggle has always been for power and self-government. This is one of the reasons while it's necessary to abandon the liberal fight against racism, an idea in white people's heads, we must fight for our liberation as a nation. African internationalism contains the only definition of the emergence of the modern nation that makes any sense, not just in general abstract terms, but in the context of the world in which we live and struggle to end our oppressive relationship with colonial capitalism. This definition of the African nation is also the basis for understanding the merger of the interests of the colonial ruling class and the white working class, both of which were born of colonial slavery. This is also an elaboration of the declaration by our party that class struggle in the real world is concentrated in the struggle against colonialism. Otherwise, there is no way to make sense of the deep unity to be found between the white ruling class and the white working class. This theoretical understanding disproves the assumption by Marx and most Europeans and European-influenced communists that there is a historically determined material basis for the unity of what they describe as the international working class against the international capitalist rulers. The contrived confusion of the Europeans, Marxists included, on this question lends to ideological and political stupefaction. It is confusion fueled by class interests. It is confusion that, once honestly confronted, must necessarily lead to the proper conclusion that any struggle for communism or historical progress must submit to the leadership of the African working class-led national liberation movement. Anything else results in nothing more than white rights gained at the expense of the rest of us. The essential class contradiction that is between the total white oppressor nation and colonized rest of us, Africans, workers included. The masses overwhelmingly chose Garvey. What is often referred to as the national question by Marxists and other leftists, especially within current US borders, not only became a question because of the need, let me say this again. What is often referred to as the national question by Marxists and other leftists, especially within current US borders, only became a question, a so-called question, because of the need for ammunition to discredit the Garvey movement. With the 1922 arrest of Garvey by the US government, assisted by the Communist Party USA, along with W.E.B. Du Bois and others who had ideological differences with him, the material evidence of the universality of the African nation was temporarily obscured. Thus, in Africa and around the world today, we are still known as Ghanaians, Somalis, Ivorians, Cameroonians, and other imaginary contrived nationalities such as New Africans in the US. These false identities rob our revolution of its inherent power and are further evidence of the correctness of our political line. Only African internationalism solves the problem associated with having to come up with hundreds of separate identities, more than 50 in Africa alone, to win what should be a single struggle for national liberation. African internationalism teaches us that Black people everywhere are part of a single African nation, with the responsibility of opening up fronts for the total liberation of Africa and African people worldwide. While African internationalism solves the issue of African nationality, it does not deny that Africans, like all peoples, have other identities as well. We are attached to different ethnic groups. We have diverse religions, speak different languages, and identify with different regions in Africa and the world. African internationalism shows us, however, that our primary identity is as Africans. This helps us to achieve strategic loyalty, loyalty to the greater good for all our people, regardless of religion, ethnicity, language, and other identities of lesser significance. In the US, this gives us the additional ability to overcome the psychology of minority politics and other places as well throughout Europe. It connects our revolution to the more than 1.5 billion other Africans locked in the same struggle, It also exposes the neo-Zionist nature of the Black Belt South line introduced in the 1920s into our movement by the Communist International and Communist Party USA to attack Garvey in the first place. And I'm saying it's a white nationalist line that was developed by the Communist Party USA, although the public face of this Black Belt South or this Black Belt South nation question was Harry Haywood, who was a member of the Communist Party, an African person who lived a long time in the Soviet Union and in white communities inside the United States, and who walked around the Garvey movement, which was millions strong to join the Communist Party USA, which at the time had only 50 Africans in the organization. The Black Belt South claimed that Black people colonized in the US have been transformed into a new nation, meant that the Communist Party could vie for the membership of Africans whose unity with Garvey revealed such a strong aspiration for African national identity and unification. In fact, it was the Garvey movement and the demand by Africans for national liberation that forced the Communist Party USA to admit that there was such a thing as an African nation within the current borders of the United States. It was only in 1928, 9 years after its founding, that the CP, or Communist Party USA, spoke of our people as a nation. The discovery of a quote unquote Negro nation in the Black Belt South was made in a miserably unsuccessful attempt to recruit Africans into the Communist Party, to recruit them away from Garvey, to recruit them away from African fundamentalism, recruit them away from the struggle for capturing Africa for Africans at home and abroad. The communists were intimidated by the power of the worldwide Garvey movement. Nevertheless, the contrived Black Belt South position never organized Africans. CP organizers, Communist Party organizers complained that Africans were not coming into the party despite this new slogan calling for self-determination for the so-called Negro nation. As one account stated, the Black Belt position, quote, did not receive wide support from African Americans, either in the urban North or in the South, while the party, meaning the Communist Party, continued to give lip service to the goal of national self-determination for Blacks, particularly in its theoretical writings. It largely ignored that demand in its practical work. The party's position, unquote, the party's position has been tested in the real world. There was a time when the African masses had the opportunity to choose between the Black Belt South line, integrationism, or assimilation, and the movement of Marcus Garvey. And when we say assimilationism, that was mostly represented by the NAACP, whose primary African spokesperson was W.E.B. Du Bois. The test with Garvey was made by the CP-supported African Blood Brotherhood and the Pan-Africanist Project of W.E.B. Du Bois and the NAACP. The masses overwhelmingly chose Garvey. This unwillingness of Africans to join the Communist Party was interpreted by some to mean that Africans did not want self-determination. This was a joy to the ears of the handful of African Communist Party USA members who were apparently attracted to the Communist Party because it represented a militant assimilationist politic that satisfied their own personal and class aspirations. The concession of Black nationality by the Communist Party USA spoke of our so-called right to self-determination, a right that would be granted by the new post-revolutionary socialist state under the leadership of the industrial, which meant white workers. The Africans would be recognized as a nation that could realize self-determination through the authority of a multinational white worker state. According to the CP USA, Africans would improve our conditions of existence essentially through the historically white nationalist trade unions, which were united with their bosses in keeping African people unemployed or underemployed. The unions physically fought us as so-called scabs when we sought work while white workers were on strike, demanding African workers maintain solidarity with sectors of the oppressor nation conveniently identified as workers. While we were to be slaves of trade unionism, the real political leadership of our people, excuse me, would come from the so-called multinational colonizer-controlled Communist Party. We would fight for higher wages and better working conditions under colonialism, but the colonizer-controlled Communist Party would handle the critical political questions. After the revolution, Africans in the Black Belt South could achieve the so-called right to self-determination according to the whim of the white workers who would now become the new colonial ruling class, socialist colonialism. Black Belt South position is opportunist, comparable to Zionism. African internationalism recognizes the African working class as the primary force for revolution, the force that will finally bring real communism to the world, benefiting Africans and all the toiling masses. African internationalism informs us that the African working class must have its own independent revolutionary party. Only such a party can guarantee the self-determination of the African nation and determine what the African nation is based on the needs, aspirations, and objectively and scientifically defined interests of African people. The Black Belt South concept was an opportunistic contrivance when it was created nearly 100 years ago. It continues to be philosophical opportunism today, and its new designation developed by the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. The so-called New African designation is also gladly accepted by some US-based African communists. This is a political line comparable to that of the European settlers who have claimed the land of the Palestinian people, originally under the guise of white socialism, renaming it Israel and themselves Israelis. The whites who occupied Southern Africa made the same claims to our land there. In South Africa, the Dutch colonizers even renamed themselves Afrikaners. In what is now called the Americas, Europeans gave themselves a similar designation as Americans. The theft of land in each instance by European settlers was central to the exploitation and oppression that have yet to be overcome. In South Africa, what is called liberation is simply domestic neo-colonialism. In reality, the land and resources are controlled by a handful of whites that effectively transformed a handful of petty bourgeois Africans into managers of resources mostly owned and controlled by white power. In Israel or occupied Palestine, the white nationalist settler colonial state also functions as a military outpost for the US, itself a settler state. Israel has violated every semblance of international law through expanding violence against Palestinians and incessant annexation of Palestinian and Arab lands. Ours is a just struggle. We do not have to create a political line that inadvertently legitimizes the theft of Palestinian land by European settlers. Since the beginning of the work on this political report, the Israeli Defense Forces have on one occasion publicly murdered 60 unarmed Palestinians and wounded more than 1,000 to reinforce their colonial control. This is how Zionism looks. It is necessary whenever there is an illegitimate annexation or theft of land of the oppressed. In the same way, the Black Belt South line places our movement for the liberation of our people in objective unity with the ongoing oppression of the indigenous people within current US borders. This remains true, notwithstanding the offensive claim by Black Zionists that the genocide of the indigenous people have sufficiently reduced their population to such an extent that it would be impractical to concede the land to them. This is a position that settler colonizers always use to justify the occupation of land, occupation and theft of the land and resources of others. We reiterate The African People's Socialist Party stands in unwavering solidarity with the indigenous people of the Americas in the struggle for their land. We recognize that indigenous people, including the Spanish-speaking residents south of the southern border of the US, who are known by an assortment of names because of European colonization of the landmass known as the Americas. Our party's uncompromising solidarity with the indigenous people is the only way our struggle can have integrity. We are not their enemies. We will not add to the extra burden. We will not add the extra burden unto their already Herculean struggle of having to defend themselves from an incursion of Africans contending with other settler colonialists for possession of their land. With our party's position, our relationship with the indigenous people can work out all the questions concerning the dispensation of the material and human resources created on this stolen land by colonially enslaved Africans. Because of African internationalism, the integrity of our national liberation struggle under the leadership of the Party of the African Working Class will not be sacrificed on the altar of the false god of New Africanism. African internationalism also makes it unnecessary for our people in our struggle to labor in isolation from each other anywhere on earth. We, Africans must fight for Africa no matter where we are. The fact that we are one Africa, one nation means we can fight for the liberation of Africa wherever we are. In Germany and other places in Europe where we are located, it is no longer necessary to define our struggle as a fight to be accepted by Europeans, nor for that matter are we without options in the US. Because we understand the true nature of our struggle for national liberation. We can be in all these places and fight for the liberation and unity of Africa, our motherland, as our common strategic objective. With African internationalism and the African People's Socialist Party, our people and movement don't have to assume we have to find some kind of compromised future in hostile and foreign lands. We are empowered to fight for Africa no matter where we are and no matter what short-term struggles that are dictated by our immediate physical location. To accept the designation as New Africans or as Bahamians or Black Brits is to doom our struggle to failure. It is to ignore the fact that our oppressive conditions of existence everywhere stem from the initial European attack on Africa that condemned Africa to the critical loss of population and a state of poverty, violence, and ignorance. It is to ignore the fact that our condition and status, wherever we are, owe themselves to the initial attack on Africa that placed our national homeland under the boot of foreign imperialist domination. Even if we were to concede to New Africans the possibility of liberating an isolated 5 states in the US as our national homeland, how does that contribute to ending the imperialist imposed misery on Africa and the rest of the African world? The 5-state solution is an attempt to solve the problems of Africans in the US at the expense of the liberation and unification of Africa and all Africans under revolutionary working class leadership. This is one reason we say that the 5-state position is philosophical opportunism, which, by the way, can only result in opportunistic practice. The 5-state position would have us voluntarily create a nation surrounded by highly armed imperialist thugs that are notorious for murder and brigandage throughout the world. The purpose of revolution is to surround the enemy, not to be voluntarily surrounded. Our presence in the US and other places of forced dispersal denies Africa the benefit of our physical presence as producers for Africa. Our refusal to recognize the critical strategic objective of uniting Africa and Africans worldwide denies Africa the wealth and value that we have created for white power throughout the Americas and the world. This is why the African Internationalist demand for reparations is a response to the initial imperialist attack made on Africa and must be seen as a revolutionary demand. Any economic advancement or so-called catch-up for Africa will require Africa's ability to wage revolutionary struggle within the US and the other centers of imperialist development rooted in slavery and colonialism. A revolutionary objective of the African Revolution must be to return to Africa the stolen value wrenched from Africa. This is the revolutionary pursuit of reparations. We will do this from every front of the African Revolution, especially in the US and Europe, but also from Canada, Australia, South Africa, and everywhere else we have, either directly or indirectly, created life for Europe and other exploiters at the expense of African development. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru. I just really want to appreciate the study up to now has been very profound, and people are, flooding in the comments saying they really appreciate this discussion and the clarity around the question of new African opportunism. Some people are saying this is the first time they've understood, this question of the Black Belt South. So just really appreciate this discussion or this PE. And just want to say that we're about to open it up for questions. So if you have a question for the chairman that you want to ask, especially related to the topic that we're discussing today, please type them into the chat on Facebook and on YouTube. We do have a couple questions in. I want to take a moment to recognize where people are viewing from. We have Boston, Massachusetts, St. Petersburg, Florida, Pinellas Park, Florida, Tampa, Florida, Brooklyn, New York, Kuwait, Chula Vista, Atlanta, Georgia, San Diego, California, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, Missouri, occupied Palestine, or otherwise known as Israel, Frankfurt, Germany, Houston, Texas, Hempstead, New York, Richmond, Virginia, Wichita, Kansas, Lakeland, Florida, Grand Rapids, Michigan, occupied Azania, South Africa, Huntsville, Alabama, and London, UK. So, huru, comrades. So the first question comes from Comrade Matsamela Odom. Asked, Uhuru Chairman, can you explain the meaning of fighting Soviets, or what I've referred to as African Soviets before? I know that this was central to the position the party put forward in the first Congress. In fact, I've really enjoyed reading in the report to the first Congress published in the Spear that this was a position intensely fought for and defended by the African working class and rank and file who attended the first Congress.
Uhuru, yeah, thank you very much. It was, and some ways that struggle was not that clear at the first Congress of the party, because inside the party's central committee, there was one person who had developed a secret relationship with a political force that held up the Black Belt South position, and that did not reveal it to the leadership of the party. We only found this out accidentally in the buildup to the Congress itself. I mean, so I'm going to say this for people who say you see forces who actually have been in the leadership of the party who have betrayed or attempted to betray the party. It's not a new phenomenon. This is part of the history of revolutionary movements throughout the world historically. And so we had to destroy that stance, and it informed how that political report read that you just referenced, comrade, because again, this was, we found out that this person who had once disappeared had attended this conference of these so-called multinationalist forces who were working to build a new party of some sort. They had adopted this Black Belt South line, and he had been there, and he had been influenced by that, and he had wanted to introduce that, but the political report itself was conscious of struggling to defeat that. So it was a hard fought for, it was a seriously fought for position. And I just want to say that in the study that we're doing, contributes to our understanding of the significance of political theory and the political line, because the fact is that the revolutionary proletariat must lead this struggle. We are engaged right now throughout this country and much of the world. There's intense struggle, furious struggle happening. Some of it is only visible inside the United States to people inside the United States, because the US controls much of the information that is disseminated, and it maintains, it intentionally makes sure that much information about struggles that Africans and other people are involved in around the world do not get discussed inside the United States. But these are critical periods, and everywhere we are, we have to. This struggle right now that might be characterized as a struggle for democracy, a democratic struggle for democratic rights. In the last period, it was something that was led by the African petty bourgeoisie, who were actually couriers, representatives of imperialism inside our own movement. Whether they were conscious of it or not, we're not judging this movement again by its own consciousness. We're judging it by what it represents in the real world. And so this movement led to this movement led by the African petty bourgeoisie developed it developed independent of its own will into a revolutionary movement that started talking about Black power, that raised up all these critical questions struggling against the whole social system. This led to murders of Malcolm and murders of King and assault on revolutionary forces throughout the country and throughout the world. This was happening. And then with that defeat, then we have still the issue of democracy is still something that prevails. The bourgeoisie knows that it's not giving us any democratic rights. It's not conceding any democracy, real democracy. So what it does is it upholds this struggle for democracy that's under the leadership of the African petty bourgeoisie. So you got this struggle for democracy being led by the petty bourgeoisie with all of its limitations. And this is the struggle for democracy under colonial domination. And so that's what we see. That's why we protest so mightily this whole notion that you have a revolutionary movement. Here, the masses of people are rising up all around the world and throughout the United States, burning police stations, trying to make serious struggle. And then you have the African petty bourgeoisie again, seeking to lead this movement, yelling stuff like Black Lives Matter. That movement started in Ferguson where they were saying kill the police. They were not saying Black Lives Matter. They were not saying hands up, don't shoot. And so the petty bourgeoisie places its own interpretation on it, and it struggles to maintain leadership. And you can see the partnership with the petty bourgeoisie and the Democratic Party. I mean, the NAACP is old, outmoded, calcified, geriatric organization. Now they got these new bloods out there who speak hip talk, who knows social media better than anybody else, et cetera. And they're saying Black Lives Matter, taking us to the same place the NAACP, SCLC, and all those other petty bourgeois groups will be taking us. That's why when we engage in this struggle around the land, and this is a critical question, because the African revolution is critical to the revolution of the world. The place how capitalism got built at our expense, at the expense of African people. And what we didn't intentionally do it, but the African Revolution went all the places that they shipped us around the world. And every struggle we're involved in, whether we are conscious of it or not, is a struggle to make that revolution. We speak immediately because we don't have the science. That's what the revolutionary leadership has to do, to take the science into these mass movements so that people can understand that what's happening to you right now in Colombia is a consequence of what happened to us a few 100 years ago in Africa. We're still making that same damn struggle to recover our dignity, our resources, et cetera. And I don't even remember what Comrade Masamela asked. Now, was there another aspect of what he said that I did not respond to at all?
Let me go back to it 1 second. I'm sorry.
But this is an important discussion, and it's more, as I said, than just some academic exercise that we're involved in. It informs the struggle that we are making for power. It informs us that we are struggling for power. That's what we're struggling for, power. And this whole thing about the Black Belt South and 5 states and what have you, it's not a struggle for power. It's a struggle for an advance for a certain sector of the African population, but it's not a struggle for the destruction of imperialism. How does Black people having some semblance of self-determination in Mississippi and Alabama and North Carolina contribute to the negation of imperialism at all? How does that contribute to it? In fact, it helps to solve a problem for imperialism, because they don't have to fight us anymore, because now we are some kind of independent thing within the embrace of the bowels, if you will, of a social system born of slavery, and that's oppressing peoples all around the world.
For real. I heard, Chairman, did you want me to go over his question again?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So it was, can you explain the meaning of fighting Soviets, or what I've read referred to as African Soviets?
Thank you. Yeah, because that speaks also, we addressed this just a little bit when we said that throughout the US and other places, not just the US, by the way, in what they call South Africa and other places, our objective is to locate ourselves right in the heart of African working class communities and to open up spaces, office, and to fight for political power and actually capture political terrain so that the people in those situations have the ability to come together and declare our own rights, fight for our own rights, have our own Black power blueprint, if you will, create our own economic enterprises, et cetera, that rely on the masses, or mass participation of the African working class and the consciousness of the African working class that we are doing is a part of the process of taking our power away from the colonizers. And so this is a part of the struggle. So the question of is to negate, this is what we're saying, it's negate the influence and the authority. And we use the term Soviets because it's an old term that actually spoke to something about the Russian Revolution, and the Soviets means councils of certain sorts. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we do even when we come up with these tribunals that we do. We give the power to the people to participate in creating our own power. And the objective is to negate the power of white power and of the colonizer. Even when we say Black community control the police, some people run around and say Black community control the police. They use the term, but they think of this as something that continues to happen inside the system. We're saying it, and we even say get petitions, do this and that. The objective herein is to take the question to the masses of the people, that the idea of Black people controlling the police must be a mass demand, and depending on what the circumstances are at any given moment, we use different tactics in order to achieve that, but it gives the people the power to self-initiate. So that we say Black community control the police. Let every demonstration happen any place around police killing, police terror. Black community control the police. It's an anti-colonial demand. And sometimes you will hear people going like in Chicago or someplace to get the city council to do that. Someplace we fought in Philadelphia to get the city council, but we do that to get the masses on board, to let the people know of the concept, to come on and to see how these people stand between you and having your own power. As we do this, the people begin to take power. Incrementally, sometimes in the communities, we create situations so that these councils of the people, so that we negate the power of the ruling class. And we've done that before. There are places, have been times where in St. Petersburg, Florida, when we were organized, there were spaces that the US police could not come to because we occupied those spaces and the people would not allow them to come to those spaces. And that's regardless of what the law is, the people can begin to create new definitions of democracy. And this is under the leadership of the working class. That's why we say revolutionary leadership, the revolutionary democratic spaces, revolutionary democratic movement, as opposed to under the leadership of the petty bourgeoisie. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. So our next question comes from Ingone in Tampa, Florida. She asks, salute, Chairman, does the current movement to secure automatic citizenship from African nations for the African diaspora support dual and contending power or influence bourgeois class interests?
It doesn't support it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening that we're going to have to make decisions of how we can relate to it. Because the thing, that dual citizenship thing, it can be something that the African Revolution, depending on where we are, how we are located, can move to bust up these borders and censor borders. But the fact is that, you're talking about dual citizenship that's offered by Ghana. And Ghana, of course, is the government heirs to the coup, that US-inspired coup that overthrew Kwame Nkrumah. And that the last I saw of it, the highest expression of this whole thing about citizenship, dual citizenship, was by the Ministry of Tourism. An objective, of course, being to bring money, to that situation. So I'm not opposed to the notion of dual citizenship. I see it as something, depending on how communist revolutionaries, party members, forces who are African internationalists take it on and deepen the question beyond what the government of Ghana wants to make it, beyond what many people who take it up and they want to flee the struggle, and somehow they're under the illusion that somehow if I get to Ghana, then the white man, won't be, the white man is just less visible, when you get to Ghana. In most instances, less visible. So it's not the same thing. We can transform it, what it means, depending on how we participate as conscious revolutionary forces. Uhuru.
Uhuru. The next question comes from Comrade Chimurenga, who's the National Director of Organization for the African People's Socialist Party, USA. Yes, Uhuru, Chairman, can you go further in your explanation of false nationality as in regards to so-called mixed race Africans?
Yeah, well, that's a concept that was, it's a real contrived concept, and it's one that's being used against the revolution. At one time, they've designated us, when I was a young person, white people in America, which was a place where much of the foundation of race nationalism, Comrade Chimurenga, was developed. So you have 1/8 percentage of Black in you, that meant that you was a nigger. So that's it, period. And and throughout this country, as up until relatively recent Israel, they would separate the blood of African people from white people, even in blood banks and things like that. And so that was a political question, political state of who we were. And now what is happening is they predict by 2045 that white people be a minority in the United States. And I suspect it happened earlier. It may have already happened, but the thing is that they have done everything they can to minimize the significance of Black people as a portion of the population. As you know, they'd split us up in what they call South Africa with colors and different kinds of characterizations, and some eagerly embraced that because it meant they didn't have to be Black, and Black was the most despised of all people, and so they embraced that. They were even given certain kinds of benefits from not being Black or Africans as such. And so that's been a special thing that they've created there. But so they've worked to create this concept of mixed race. And they've done that in England for a while now. That's a relatively new concept in the United States. And it was one that was really promoted with the selection of Barack Hussein Obama as the president, because he sort of exemplified the essential mixed race person. And then you see people who have children born from African and Europeans, and they're so happy. They hold them up. It's just my little mixed race, just like Obama's little mixed race child. They've created this new creature that is supposed to, be something that denies Africans another element, another sector of the African population, to do everything they can to minimize that. So that's part of what it is. And you got a lot of mixed race people running around. They call themselves mixed race people, they're silly, but we've been silly around this question for a long time, because my grandma was Indian, and all the other kind of stuff and sometimes the grandmama was Indian. There's a story, that's separate kind of story associated with that, but be anything other than to be Black, because one is punished very severely for being Black, which is to be African. And then the concept of national consciousness, false consciousness, again, it serves the purpose of dividing us. Look at all of Africa. Look at how many so-called different countries there are in Africa. Look at how many Black people there are around the world, and we can't locate each other because we've been given these names by our oppressors, because we identified with some colony that they created, etc. And you can see the significance of mixed race when you just look at how they separate African people all around the world. That's the whole objective, is to split us up. They work 24 hours a day to make sure that we are not united. That's where you get this Adults, this African descendants of slaves, and all these other characterizations that they throw at us to keep us from being able to consolidate ourselves into the African nation under the leadership of the advanced detachment, the working class that's necessary to make this revolution. Uhuru. So don't be mixed up on mixed race.
Yeah. I don't know who I am.
I know who I is. Yeah.
So this next question comes from Sifiwe on Facebook. Asked where the
From whom?
Sifiwe. Sifiwe.
Sifiwe. Sifiwe. Okay.
Were the national liberation movements in Africa a false solution in the way you are suggesting the five belt solution is a compromise?
It was, yeah, it was a false solution. It was a inadequate solution. And it was a solution that, remember, there have been efforts, this is really important for us to understand, to make a united revolutionary movement for African people. That's what we are continuing. We're not just some Johnny-come-lately on this question. That's why you can't read about Marcus Garvey. That's why you can read all the stuff about W.E. Du Bois, who was a real brilliant man, but was brilliantly wrong, brilliantly opportunistic, brilliantly betrayal of the African Revolution. So you see this Garvey, and then you see this intervention by the petty bourgeoisie. And when I say the petty bourgeoisie, be clear, W.E. Du Bois was a member of the NAACP who had constructed this whole concept of a talented 10% of Black people, the most educated, et cetera, who would be under the auspices of white power, representing the leadership of the rest of the Black people. And he fought Garvey, who was putting an all-African solution forward. And he gave all kinds of ridiculous reasons for this. This very erudite, Harvard-educated, Berlin-educated African, brilliant. You've read his stuff. And he comes up with the notion at one point that Black people in America couldn't even live in Africa because the conditions in terms of temperature and climate were so harsh. This was nonsense. But it was an argument. Any argument doesn't have to make any sense that keeps African people from uniting with each other and then allows them to stay embraced with the United States government in some way or another. So Du Bois was an integrationist, and his whole line fought against, and he was a Pan-Africanist. Think about this, Pan-Africanist integrationist, who whole line fought against the notion of African people coming together as one all throughout the world. And he fought that, and he helped to put Garvey in prison along with the Communist Party, which had a political difference with Garvey too. But remember that. The whole Black Belt South thing coming from the Communist Party was political, based on political differences. And then there was the African Blood Brotherhood. These were so-called communists who also call themselves Black nationalists or something to that effect, who under the leadership of a man named Cyril Briggs, and who was the holding place for the Communist Party when they had an African that they wanted, the Communist Party recruited an African and put that African in the African Blood Brotherhood to carry out the mission among Black people, et cetera. So this is something that that they have pursued all along, and they have continued to split us. And then, of course, there was Nkrumah. And Nkrumah fought a very serious way to unite all of Africa. That was his mission. And he said he was influenced by Garvey, but he also came under the influence of W.E.B. Du Bois. In fact, there's a huge center for W.E. Du Bois right now in Ghana. And you know where it is? Right across the street from one of the largest US embassies in the world, which means it's a spy center, right? In Ghana, right now, in Accra. So they fought against Nkrumah and helped to, they overthrew Nkrumah. And I'm convinced they murdered Nkrumah to keep that from happening. Lumumba was somebody who was on the same side in this question. So they've done everything they could to keep Africans divided and keep us from accomplishing the absolute necessary aims. By the way, I'm told that sometimes later, George Patmore, who was worked with Du Bois and did everything he could at one time. It's interesting, Patmore was a member of the Communist Party. And then he left the Communist Party, worked with Du Bois, and as a member of the Communist Party, he wrote some of the most vicious, visceral attacks on the Garvey movement. He left the Communist Party, he worked with Du Bois, he helped to create the 1945 Pan-Africanist Congress that happened in Manchester, in England, the first one that had masses of people to it, and that's because his connection with labor movements and things like that, as having coming from the Communist Party USA. And later on, I'm told that he said, you know, Garvey was this amazing prophet and who, you know, brought, you know, some kind of information, you know, help people should have followed. But we African people,
It's a false national consciousness, and people are working all the time to keep us from coming to that conclusion. Keeping Africa split, keeping Africa divided, keeping African people divided is a strategic objective of imperialist white power to make and hold the social system together. Because Africa consciousness of its interest, Africa consciousness of the value that to be found not only on the continent of Africa in terms of resources and things like that, but in the genius of African people that spread out, separated, and not available to Africa and to African people. That Africa will be invincible, and that Africa will bring down the whole rotten capitalist social system. And that's why they work overtime all the time to make sure that we never achieve consciousness, and especially consciousness under the leadership of the African working class that now, for the first time in history, has its own revolutionary party, a proletarian party of the African nation. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. All right, our next question comes from Agbe in Frankfurt, Germany.
Agbe.
Agbe, Uhuru.
Uhuru,
So
Agbe.
the question is, can you explain more on Zionism? And I'm guessing that because you brought up the whole thing about how the Black Belt South theory is comparable to Zionism. So if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, we got a bunch of Europeans who left Europe and left Europe being terrorized. I mean, those white people in Europe were murdering, butchering, and killing them and doing horrible things. And a response to this, a political response to this, by bourgeois aspiring sector of this European Jewish population was to have its own state. And this, be aware of this. This state, you find land-hungry sectors of populations around the world. And that's true of the African population here and every place else, land-hungry, without possession of land. And so the European Jews sought to create their own state. And their own state could not be found in Frankfurt. And so they looked all around the world. And among the places they thought were Uganda and Africa and other places they looked, and they came upon Palestine. Of course, they had been working for Palestine at least since the 14, 15, 16, that whole era. And they chose Palestine. And this was not a revolution. They called themselves socialists at some time. They stole the land from the Arab people, Palestinian Arab people. They worked with the British and the US to take this land. And they took it and they created the horrible crimes. And the objective was to establish a bourgeois state in Palestine. It's a capitalist state. It's a vicious capitalist state. And they actually resurrected a dead language, Hebrew language. They call themselves Israelis. They were Russians. There was even a white woman from Milwaukee, Golda Meir, who I think had become the president of something, in occupied Palestine, so that the Palestinian Arabs couldn't live there. They were pushed out, they were bombed out, they were killed out and pushed out. And then you have this situation now where somebody from Milwaukee, somebody from Russia, somebody from all these other, Germany, England, all these other places, they come, they poll, etc., and then they consolidate as this so-called Israeli nation. These are Europeans. And they are settlers there, and they are settler state that serves the interests of imperialism. And that doesn't, no matter what bad thing may have happened to Jews in Europe, that Jewish ruling class, that Jewish capitalist, thuggish entity that has captured Palestine and kills and maims the Palestinian people in its own interest, it has no relationship to progress for human beings or even for Jews, for that matter. So any more than Obama had something that was helpful for African people in this country. He served imperialism the same way they are doing there. So we make this analogy where you have a group of people who can leave a place and call it their own, who can talk about, we got 5 states. Here you got the indigenous people living in concentration camps today. Today, 2020 indigenous people living in concentration camps called Indian reservations. And one of the most fundamental component aspects of of their oppression, their exploitation, the theft of their land, where they are characterized as illegals, and where they are living in, the children are often put in cages and what have you. This is to unite with this notion that somehow African people, because we were born here or we came here, this is our land, is to unite with everything that imperialism is doing to the indigenous people. That's why we say it's analogous to the Zionism, this Zionist movement that stole the land of the Palestinian people, that oppresses and kills them by settlers. The same settlers, their relatives, their kith and kin, the kith and kin of the people who occupy Palestine are right here in this country. They don't even have to work hard to be a part of the same settler collective. So that's what we mean. I hope that's helpful. That's analogous to what they are trying to impose on us. And I've heard Africans in this country who make statements to the effect that I hear Jews make about killing Palestinians, taking Palestinians' land, arming themselves to the teeth to kill and maintain this relationship. I've heard Africans make those kinds of ridiculous, insensitive, and horrendous, pro-imperialist kinds of statements about keeping the land of the indigenous people, and coming up with all kinds of incredible notions about why we were here first before. You Africans did not lose any freedom as a consequence of the indigenous people taking something from us. We lost freedom because the white man who controls this land came to Africa, kidnapped us, put us here, worked us like beasts, and created a social system that dominates us, dominates the indigenous people of this land, dominates the people of Palestine and all the oppressed peoples around the world. This is bogus, this is nonsense. So we throw it out, we dismiss it, etc. And I'm hoping that this explanation arms everybody in our movement and others to be able to struggle against that kind of nonsense. So we say this not because we don't like you as persons, but we probably wouldn't like you as persons. We say that because it's objectively true in terms of what side you're lining up on, whether you're lining up with the people or whether you're lining up with the pigs, with the imperialists. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman, for that explanation, that breakdown. It's really powerful. I don't know how anybody cannot understand that question after that.
Sifiwe, was that the brother's name, the comrade's name? Sifiwe?
That was Agbe who asked that question in Germany.
Okay. Uhuru.
Uhuru. So this next question comes from Comrade Kumba. And he asked, Chairman, do you think that the Black Belt theorists might bump heads, for instance, Republic of New Africa versus Nation of Islam, for the battle for the South, both wanting the land?
Well, I think, no, I don't think they're going to bump heads. First of all, the Nation of Islam has always been ambiguous about what this land mass should be, where it is, whether it's always been ambiguous, purposely and consciously very ambiguous around that. The significance of the original Nation of Islam is that it did raise the question. You know, it too was influenced by the movement of Marcus Garvey. But the significance was that it raised a national question at a time when this whole notion of integration and what have you, and fear of the white man was something that dominated the politic of African people, certainly in the United States and many places around the world. And so to even characterize itself as the Nation of Islam, and to say, but we have a land of our own, we have to have a land of our own, it was an important kind of statement. It was an important move at the time, very significant. And then I don't think that you're going to have any bumping of heads, because there's never been more than a political statement that's been made. There's never been really any effort to take that land. The Republic of New Africa has actually engaged itself in contentious struggles to take land. In Mississippi, for example, I mean, these comrades actually had gun battles with the state, with the police in Mississippi, when they heard that the nation was there, the Republic of New Africa was there, and that they were actually trying to construct edifices and things that would ultimately represent, the presence of this new African government. They were attacked, and they fought back. That's one thing about the Republic. They've always fought back when they were attacked by the state. And in many instances, perhaps most instances, they've been successful in fighting off the state and shooting them up and things like that. But so I don't think you're going to have any head bumping, because for one thing, the nation has never gone further than that, than just making that statement. They never acted on it. Like, I mean, they bought land, the nation. They bought, certain kinds of enterprises, or bought into enterprises at different times. But they've never done so like in any kind of contention with the state, with the colonial state itself. And the Republic of New Africa, I can't even see its practical expression anymore. Not like that period when I was talking about, they were actually, engaged consciously in efforts to take land in contention with the, so I don't expect you're going to see any bumping of heads there.
True.
Plus, Comrade Kumba, the work that you're going to be doing is minimizing that question anyway. One of the things that we will state in this political report, in this section of the political report, is that we've seen this issue resolved in actual life. This debate on whether it's 5 states or Black Belt South, integration, or African internationalism, we've seen that in practice. We've seen it tested in the real world, and where masses of people had opportunities to choose between the NAACP and its iterations as the NAACP or the Pan-Africanist movement, between the Black Belt South thing that as eventually held up by people like Cyril Briggs, and Marcus Garvey. And what we've seen is that Garvey had this incredible movement of more than 11 million African people around the world. So it's not a question of which is the viable line. The line has proved itself out in the world. So which means, Comrade Kumba, do what you're supposed to do. And that is what helps to crystallize or clarify this question and minimize the significance of head bumps or fist bumps or anything else by these contending forces. Uhuru.
True. All right, our next question comes from Comrade Nasir Alamin in Kuwait. He says, Uhuru, just for clarity, when understanding the party's position, is colonialism and imperialism used interchangeably?
Uhuru. Yeah, let me just say that we differ, I think, with certainly with the Marxists, and who have, and I might even say like Lenin in particular, who proclaimed that capitalism was born of, that imperialism was born of capitalism developed to a high stage. We say the whole term imperialism stems from the word empire. And it was the empire that enslaved us. It was the empire from England and other places, the empires that captured Africa, enslaved us, and captured the Americas and things like that. And from this aggression by the empire, we saw the emergence of a whole new world social system that transformed Europe and transformed the whole world. And this is the birth of capitalism. Capitalism came from that. And when we talk about, and sometimes we do say imperialism, and sometimes we say a colonialism, and because both imperialism and colonialism born from the same process. The empire created the colony, and from this stemmed ultimately the whole capitalist system. So yeah, we sometimes use that interchangeably, but and sometimes we say colonial capitalism, and sometimes we say capitalist colonialism. But yeah, it's empire, imperialism, colonialism. Colonialism is born of the same process. The imperialists created the colonies. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman, for that breakdown. Next question comes from Daryl Antoine on Facebook. Daryl asks, Uhuru, Chairman, this is a basic question. I'm convinced that capitalism hasn't worked for Black people worldwide in capitalism's history, but I am not convinced that socialism has worked in the world either, i.e. China, USSR, North Korea, etc. What specific readings do you recommend I get into to show socialism could work for the future?
First of all, I want to unite with you that you have not seen socialism work in China, the USSR, or any place in the world, because socialism has not occurred. If you read Uneasy Equilibrium, the political report to the Sixth Congress, if you read even the political report to the First Congress of 1981, what you will find is African internationalism teaches us that the basis for, and especially the political report, I think, to the Fourth Congress, Easeway, Late to the Africa, the basis for the advent of socialism, let's say the historical basis for the advent of socialism is the destruction of the pedestal upon which the whole capitalist system rests. Karl Marx talked about that. He said that what he called wage slavery, which is capitalism, in what he called the New World, and in Europe required slavery pure and simple in the New World as its pedestal. That is, colonialism was a requisite for the advent of capitalism. And he was right when he said that. And so this whole struggle to build socialism, we talked about it, how we said that in places like Russia and China, these were places that existed in a sea of, the world economy was a capitalist world economy. It didn't go away just because Russians got involved in this revolutionary struggle. The historical basis for the rise of a socialism had not occurred. What had occurred was the political conditions for socialists to seize power. And that's entirely different. The political conditions for socialists to seize power, people who were socialists seized power in China, seized power in Russia, seized power in Cuba. But the historical conditions, which is the destruction of the pedestal upon which all capitalist activity depends for its existence, those historical conditions had not yet come into existence. And what we see now throughout the world is the struggle to destroy the pedestal of capitalism, which is struggle against various iterations of colonialism, being generalized. This is the profound contradiction that we see of the whole capitalist imperialist system today, is that there's generalized struggle of oppressed people all around the world who are taking the pedestal out. The foundation for capitalism is being destroyed. And that's the thing that we say makes socialism a real possibility today. And the unified struggle of the African proletariat under its own revolutionary party is critical, strategic, critical, absolutely significant for making that happen. So, you know, that's why we say it. And there we, you know, that's the scientific basis for it. And yeah, I'll leave it there. I don't want to overtalk it. Daryl, I hope that worked. Uhuru.
Thank you, Chairman. The next question comes from Comrade Temba Shabanda. Asks, is Buying Black or the New Black Wall Street movement examples of dual and contending power?
Well, you know, here's the issue that African people are confronted with all the time. Because we are colonized and oppressed as a nation of people that's been dispersed around the world. I mean, you know, even petty bourgeois governments, even the government of Ghana is a part of the oppressed African nation. The government of the horribly corrupt and inept government of South Africa is a part of the same colonized nation. And so, and what does colonialism do? It robs all of the people of a capacity for creating life for ourselves. The colony creates life for the colonizer. It pumps resources to the colonizer at the expense of the colonized. And it destroys any meaningful, coherent national economy. Every economic activity is tethered to the economy of the colonizer. That's how that works. So when you see even petty bourgeois African forces who are fighting for their own interests. And that's what, when you see the African petty bourgeoisie run down and say, buy black, that's the petty bourgeois forces that force that's fighting for its own interests. You know, buy black, buy my stuff, you know. And there is a real serious struggle to create an independent a national economy for the oppressed. But that economy has to be one, again, that negates the economic influence and power of the colonizer. And that's why we say, you know, while buy black, you know, sounds really good, and people say that X number of trillions of dollars exist in the black community that goes in the one door and out the other door, et cetera, we don't do anything with it. We say buy black power. And what that means is that we have to have an economy. You can't have a real freedom if you don't have an independent economy. And that's part of what the struggle is about. The whole struggle against colonialism is a struggle to liberate the productive forces, the human beings who are the producers, the land, the materials necessary to produce. That's what the struggle is all about. So and this means that it's possible to have a movement of conscious people who can be engaged in economic life, even under capitalism, with an understanding that the objective here is to negate the colonial influence, negate colonialism. And when this activity is done under the leadership of the African proletariat, because the proletariat, the African working class, and its own revolutionary organization has a responsibility to solving the problems of the revolution. The fundamental problem of the revolution is people have to be able to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. So we don't have to wait till after white power collapse or something like that to make it happen. We are in the process right now of creating a dual and contending capacity, one that contends with the bourgeoisie. And so it's not just a matter of buying black, because as you know, many of the people you buy black from, they treat African people, you know, beastly, you know, you know, so what we're saying is that these Africans have to become consciously part. Those people who create their businesses of buying black power, they have to be promoting buy black power. They have to say, we are a part of an anti-colonial movement to achieve economic independence for black people, for the African nation. And this is the basis of my call to you, Africans, to buy from me, to purchase this that we have. And this is something that can happen under the leadership of the African working class. So that's what a distinction that we would make. Uhuda. I hope that was helpful, Comrade Timbo.
So we're winding down. So looks like we're gonna take about one more question. And it's gonna come from Comrade Matsamela. And just wanna say there are still lots of questions. So we'll have to entertain those next week as well. But this last question says, Queen Mother Moore had joined the Communist Party because of the question of African nationality, but also left because of the opportunism in the Communist Party and the opposition she saw inside the Communist Party USA to African self-determination. She actually says that many Africans in the Communist Party USA were the fiercest opposition to African independence. Can you speak to Queen Mother Moore's position? Because I feel that new Africans and others misrepresent Queen Mother Moore's position. I know she was a founding member of the RNA, but I had debated recently where I argued that I did not see her politics as new Africanness as it is generally understood.
I think you're right. I love Queen Mother Moore. If you would look at some of the photos of the World Tribunal that we created for reparations, you would see her in the front row. You would have heard her say that, you know, it was up to us to finish this thing. You would have seen her at least one of our congresses that was held right here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I agree that Queen Mother Moore did not hold that position. And I'm not sure that many people who might have been founding members of the Republic of New Africa held that position exactly. A thing about the Republic of New Africa that is significant is that it was something that was coming into existence. They characterized themselves. I knew Comrade Obadeli, who
it characterized itself as Malcolm X, that's from Malcolm X. And it was a time, you know, Malcolm had been assassinated, much of the Black liberation movement crippled, wounded. When we saw its emergence. And there's this whole notion of Black people having our own state, our own nation, was something that resonated with a lot of people. I remember Huey P. Newton wrote something responding to an effort to recruit his participation in the process, that it wasn't hostile, but did not recognize it as something that was possible at the time. And I attended a fundamental conference of the Republic of New Africa. Didn't know what I was going to at the time, but in Detroit in 1969, I think it was. And so, but I think that, you know, the question of actual land clarity and things like that was not definitively achieved by the African Revolution. And this was one of these are some of the unresolved things that happened with the defeat of our revolution. There were many unresolved questions that were coming to the forefront. And here's one of the major contradictions that I mentioned earlier, that Africans are oppressed as a nation of people. And national liberation has been on the forefront of most conscious African people for a long period of time. National liberation, when I say national liberation, I might not have called it that, but it meant freedom for Black people, freedom for this select group of people, national liberation. And on the one hand, but the question that did not get addressed frequently enough or effectively enough was the class struggle that was contained within the struggle for national liberation. Because just because everybody wanted liberation, the question was who's going to lead it and whose definition of liberation was going to be the one that succeeded. The African petty bourgeoisie, there was a sector of the African petty bourgeoisie that wanted liberation, would pick up guns and fight for it. But that didn't mean that they wanted to overturn the social system. We went for years fighting struggle with new Africanists who could not say that they were even socialists. And ultimately, just through a consequence of real ideological battles and struggles with us, they conceded to being some kind of socialist. So the Queen Mother Moore was, as you said, might have been a member of the Communist Party. And that would have come in part as a consequence of the political line that I referenced here, how the Communist Party took up this whole issue of Africans being a nation of people, because Queen Mother Moore was a Garveyite. And there are stories she used to always tell about her relationship to Garvey and the Garvey movement. So I would agree with Kermit Masamela. Queen Mother Moore definitely recognize the universality of the struggle of African people as opposed to it being 5 states or Black Belt South, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, so that will conclude it for our Q&A for today. Is there any last things you wanted to say before we get into announcements?
Just that I'm hoping that that people recognize the significance of theory at this time. It is fundamental, and I think that is happening. I see more and more people who, especially at this time, especially this tumultuous moment in history where people are in the streets and we are in a contest about who's going to lead this movement, whether it's going to be your city council through their spokesperson in the streets, you know, who calling for Black Lives Matter, or whether it's going to be the anarchists who have their own beefs with any kind of authority, whether it's going to be a left that can talk about fighting against capitalism, but leave the really unresolved question for all people in the world, and especially white people in this country, about Africans, the indigenous peoples in this country. That's the question that we are in the process of resolving now. And that's why we have to be in the mix of all these struggles. So we'll talk again next Sunday. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much for this incredible study. And I want to let everybody know that because of time, you know, if your question was not answered, one of our moderators will correspond with you and make sure that the chairman sees your question, and we'll actually address them first in the Q&A portion next Sunday. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. For Revolutionary Radio, dynamic shows and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android or online at blackpower96.org. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, to fill out our contact form. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. That was the piece we were reading from today. You can order that at burningspearmarketplace.com. The African Revolution Behind Enemy Lines, 44 Years of White Solidarity with Black Power. Wednesday, September 30th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. You can join this discussion, which will be featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Solidarity Committee's chairwoman, Penny Hess, on the significance of the party forming the African People's Solidarity Committee 44 years ago. It will be on Zoom and also broadcast on YouTube. And you can go to youtube.com/Uhuru Solidarity and facebook.com/APSC Uhuru. It's a very historic event. Again, 44 years since the founding. The chairman founded the strategy of white solidarity with Black power in the form of the African People's Solidarity Committee. On November 6th through the 8th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations hosts its annual Black People's March on the White House, themed Black Power Matters, Down with Colonialism, Black Community Control of the Police. Plan to attend and register today at blackisbackcoalition.org. We are calling on all people to follow the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to COVID-19. APDEP has launched an international telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. This is really important, comrades. There are different places, including where we're located in Florida, that are on phase 3 of their reopening. Meanwhile, statistics are still revealing as recently as 90% of the children dying from COVID-19 are African or Mexican indigenous children. So this situation is extremely important, and APDEP is the vehicle to which we've been able to take this on. And to keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspears.com events page and subscribe to our mailing list. And lastly, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, you won't just have to see him next Sunday. You can see him every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on his Facebook page and the Burning Spear TV YouTube page for an address to the African nation, which is usually a 30-minute presentation that Chairman Omali Yeshitela gives, regarding an analysis with topical events, the things that are happening. Recently, he did the question of the verdict regarding the murder of Breonna Taylor. And again, that happens every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, from the Chairman Omali Yeshitela Facebook page and Burning Spear TV YouTube page. So that's another opportunity for African internationalist analysis, political education. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.